Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are really tearing apart a single powerful idea. It's about how organizations, and I mean any organization, spiritual communities, corporate boards, even small clubs, handle it when their leaders fail. We're wrestling with this fascinating tension between the instinct to be discreet, to handle things quietly, and the sometimes painful need for public transparency. We're diving deep into one specific source today. It's an instruction found in 1 Timothy 5.1a, and we've pulled it from a text we've titled Scriptural Mandate for Public Reproof. Mm-hmm. It's a deceptively short command, but wow, it carries some massive implications for governance and, collective standards. So our mission today is to figure out why. Why does this text insist that accountability for senior leaders must, under certain conditions, be visible to everyone? What is that public action designed to do for the entire group that's watching? Because this isn't just about punishment. It feels more like population control, but in the healthiest sense of the word. Mm-hmm. So we're dealing with moral authority here and how to protect that authority.
This short text suggests that for those who hold power, the standard of correction, it has to be fundamentally different from the standard applied to everyone else.
It really does. And it immediately introduces a challenging idea. The default mode for any organization is self-preservation. And that usually means protecting the inner circle, managing bad news internally. This text it targets that vulnerability head on.
Exactly. The directive is specifically about the ethical accountability of leaders. Mm-hmm. But if we pull back the mechanism, this public correction of an unrepentant authority figure, you could apply that anywhere you see a hierarchy.
We really need to set the threshold clearly, though. The text is very precise. This mandate for public correction, it only applies when leaders persist in wrongdoing.
Right.
This isn't about a momentary slip-up or a mistake that's quickly corrected. The implicit context here, and it's critical, is that private attempts at correction have already happened, and they failed.
So the community, or maybe the oversight body, has already done the quiet work, the private conversation, the warning.
The chance for repentance.
Right, that chance. And yet, the failure continues. So persistence is the trigger. It moves the issue from a private sort of pastoral concern to a public systemic risk.
That's the crucial distinction. If the leader is repentant and stops the behavior, discretion is usually maintained. But persistence, that signals something worse than a single ethical failure. It signals defiance of the ethical standard itself. And when that defiance comes from the top, it threatens the entire system.
And once that defiance crosses the threshold, the core instruction is, it's uncompromising. The leader must be publicly rebuked. The option to handle it quietly, to save face for the sake of reputation, it's gone.
It's off the table.
The focus shifts entirely to the external audience.
And what's so fascinating here is how this just runs completely counter to our modern institutional reflexes. Most corporations, for instance, are legally and financially motivated to settle issues confidentially.
Oh, sure. Force an NDA, but get a quiet resignation.
Exactly. Shield the internal failure from the public. This text rejects that instinct entirely when it's about persistent moral failure in leadership. It demands visibility, even if it causes temporary distress.
Okay, but I have to push back a little here. Isn't there a huge cost to the group when you air that failure publicly? It seems like it could create a schism or undermine the authority of the remaining leaders.
That risk is absolutely present, and that's the institutional courage it requires. But the text implies that the cost of hidden, persistent corruption is ultimately, it's much higher than the cost of a transparent correction. Hidden failure erodes trust silently. Public correction, on the other hand, it actually restores the integrity of the process, even if it wounds the organization publicly in the short term. The action itself becomes a demonstration of the organization's commitment to its own standards.
That makes sense. It shifts the focus from damage control, which is always internal and secret, to standard reinforcement. And that has to be external. It needs visibility. So we've established the shift from private discretion to public necessity, all triggered by this persistent wrongdoing. But now we hit the big question, the why. Why is this public correction the specific remedy? It just seems so counterintuitive to broadcast the failure of your own authority figures.
And here's where the text is brilliant, because it explicitly states its own purpose. The directive is not primarily focused on punishing the individual leader, though, consequence is certainly involved. The driving force is external. It's focused on the group dynamics.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. You're saying the primary function is, it's almost purely pedagogical, a teaching moment.
Precisely. The text states the primary function of this transparent correction is to instill a healthy reverence and caution among the rest of the members. It's essentially a public lesson where the persistent failure of one person becomes a high-stakes lesson for everyone else.
That is the nugget we need to analyze. A public performance of consequence designed specifically for the audience. The individual leader is almost secondary to the collective education that's taking place.
And the mechanism of deterrence relies entirely on that visibility. If the consequences for these breaches are hidden, followers are just left to assume one of two things.
Either the standards don't apply to the elite,
right, or that the standards are soft and negotiable. By making the consequences visible, you create a collective deterrent. You're educating the group on the non-negotiable severity of the moral law.
Let's use a modern analogy. Think about financial markets. When a high-profile CEO engages in, say, insider trading, the SEC doesn't just fine them privately and let them keep their job.
Oh, of course not.
They announce the charges publicly, often with a lot of detail. The penalty is harsh, and it is very, very visible.
Exactly. That public announcement, the perp walk, the press conference, the massive fine, it isn't just about making that one CEO pay. It's about sending a clear, unambiguous signal to every single trader, every director, and every junior analyst watching. These are the rules, and no matter how high up you are, the rules apply.
Right.
The deterrent effect on the entire market relies on the visibility of that justice.
If the penalty flag is thrown in the moment, that's just justice. But the public announcement of the penalty, that sets a visible, non-negotiable standard for everyone watching the game. If the star quarterback gets benched for persistently breaking the rules, everyone on the team and everyone in the stands knows that rule is serious.
And that the standards apply universally, regardless of status or talent.
Yeah.
And this visibility also addresses the cynicism that opaqueness inevitably creates. If accountability is always handled behind closed doors, the community is left guessing. Was the leader really held accountable? Did they just get a slap on the wrist? Public correction just removes all that ambiguity.
And it forces the entire group to internalize the severity of the moral commitment, doesn't it? The community can't pretend the issue doesn't exist anymore. They become witnesses to the standard being enforced, which has to strengthen their shared commitment.
Absolutely. The accountability stops being a private transaction between the leader and their boss, and it becomes a public affirmation of the organization's moral code. It's a high-stakes lesson in institutional fidelity. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate goal here, it moves beyond just immediate caution and into preservation. The public action is fundamentally designed to preserve the integrity and moral standards of the entire body. It's a mechanism of ethical hygiene for the whole group.
That's a great way to put it. We often frame integrity as a purely individual trait, but in this context, the text frames it as a collective asset. If leadership failure is consistently ignored or hidden, you're not just accepting one person's failure.
No.
You are signaling to everyone else that the community's foundational standards are negotiable, or worse, that they're eroding.
It creates a slow, systemic rot. If the leader is allowed to persist in behavior that's unacceptable for the junior members, you effectively lower the ethical ceiling for everyone.
And you do it without ever having a meeting to formally change the rules.
That's exactly the danger. Ignoring persistent failure in a leader poisons the well. If the community sees that the shepherd disregards the moral boundaries without consequence, the sheep will eventually follow suit. Or they'll just lose faith in the system itself.
So the public rebuke reinstates the standard. It reinforces that moral foundation.
It demonstrates that the standard is greater than the person holding the office.
But let's add one more layer of complexity here. What is the line between necessary public correction and just destructive public shaming? Because the source mandate seems very, very precise. It's for a specific type of person, a leader, and a specific type of failure. Persistence.
And that precision is key. This isn't a call for public humiliation for every minor infraction. It's a carefully calibrated judicial action against unrepentant, sustained ethical defiance from a high-status individual. The aim is correction and group deterrence, not gratuitous destruction. When the group sees that the process is focused, that it's fair and reserved for the specific kind of defiance, the integrity of the process itself is preserved.
So if it were used capriciously,
the whole system would break down into fear and gossip. It would be a disaster.
That distinction is essential then. It's not about finding fault. It's about responding to the willful failure to correct a fault. It reinforces the idea that true institutional integrity is measured not by how perfectly its leaders behave,
but by how rigorously they are held accountable when they fail to meet the standards.
So it's a beautifully designed, high-stakes, two-part function. The public rebuke is, at the same time, a specific correction for the leader.
and a comprehensive, visible teaching moment for the followers.
Exactly. Ensuring the community's moral foundation stays solid and clearly defined. You correct one to educate, caution, and preserve many. So to quickly summarize the unique nature of this text, 1 Timothy 5.12, we've really analyzed three powerful takeaways for any organization dealing with authority. First, this mandate is specifically for leaders who are persisting in wrongdoing. All private attempts at resolution have failed.
Second, it mandates public, not private, correction. Transparency is non-negotiable at this stage.
And crucially, the third point.
Its goal is collective deterrence. The public visibility is intended to instill caution and reverence among everyone watching, and that preserves the integrity of the whole group. It's a system designed to fight the slow decay of cynicism that opaque accountability causes.
Which raises an important question, especially for how these huge modern organizations function today. What is the true long-term cost to a group when the accountability for its highest-ranking members is always opaque? We see the financial costs of scandal, sure, but what about the cost to the collective soul of the place?
Well, when the public only sees the success, the polished statements, the curated media, but the failure is always managed internally, secretly, it just destroys the perception of universal standards. The collective trust erodes because the process is invisible, leading people to believe the standards are applied differently based on your rank.
So that opaqueness ultimately creates the very cynicism the text is trying to avoid. If the mechanism of justice is invisible, eventually the moral standards themselves become invisible and unenforceable, no matter how often they're preached. And that profound dynamic leads us to a final provocative thought for you to explore on your own. Given that the goal of this public rebuke is explicitly stated as maintaining collective standards through deterrence, does that imply the visibility of justice is ultimately as important, or perhaps even more important, than the internal reality of justice itself? At least, purely in terms of preserving social order. Think about that complex tension between perceived fairness and actual fairness, especially when the entire future of the community is at stake. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sometimes challenging mandates of accountability and transparency. Until next time, keep exploring the sources.